Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of my Changing Lives series of conversations with guests about the ways our beliefs and our lives have changed as we've grown older and wiser. Um, I am Wendy Gordon. My Substack is Changing Lives, and it's for anyone who wants to change lives, starting with their own. Because obviously we can't heal or change the world until we heal ourselves first. And when we do, and when we're willing to share honestly about our lives and the beliefs we've had to let go of, and the things we do now to stay sane in an increasingly insane world, the more we help each other be the change we want to see. And so my guest today is Brad Wetzler, and I am going to let him talk a little bit about his Substack, and we'll go from there.
Great. Well, it's good to see you, Wendy, and thank you for having me on. So I write a Substack called Seeking Letters to the Restless. And in that space, I've been writing about, my own spiritual journey, which has just evolved so much over the past, throughout my entire life, but recently has sort of found a little bit of ground to stand on, I think. And that ground is sort of standing in wonder about it all and not needing to choose a particular path and but also finding connection to a higher power, to God in that place, and finding a felt sense of my spirituality and my connection with the divine, and finding a little bit of ease in that discomfortable place of being a seeker. And I think I finally accepted that was my path, to not land in a particular tradition, and I found some joy there too. So that's kind of what I write about. I was a travel writer for years for major magazines, and so I often bring travel and the external world into it, and I sometimes draw from my book Into the Soul of the World, my A Journey to Healing, which was published 2 years ago by Hachette. And so some of the stories I draw from are in my book of healing from PTSD and depression, and how travel also served me in that healing journey. So
Sounds very similar to my journey, actually. I also have complex PTSD and
mm,
depression, and when my career as a pastor ended unexpectedly, at first against my will, and then as I interviewed with other congregations, I realized, no, I can't in good conscience do this anymore. The
mm,
shifting political realities and alliance of church and empire, I just wasn't for me. Let's just put it that way. So, but that led to a severe depression because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life now. And um, that eventually, after a lot of hell, led to my current work as a writer and speaker and coach, support
mm,
group leader. Um, and like you, my spiritual beliefs have evolved. Even though I was never in a conservative religious tradition, my denomination was fairly progressive. Nevertheless, it was still Christian, and
mhm,
I now don't consider myself a Christian. I call myself a Jesus follower or a Christian adjacent sometimes,
mm,
because I see Jesus as a great spiritual teacher and role model, and highly enlightened human being in touch with the divine, more so than being a god or divine himself, in a way that no other human can be. And I also think his primary teaching, of course, was love your neighbor as yourself, and everyone is your neighbor. And I think every great spiritual teacher has that same core message, and that if we all did that, the world would be a
yeah,
very different place.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing your journey, which is I'm just hearing, and I hope I can read the book version of that, or read the book version of that soon.
I hope so too. I don't have a book out about the journey yet. I do have hundreds of articles on my Substack, Changing Lives. Um, and I've written some articles. I live in Texas, so there's an independent publication called the Texas Observer.
Hmm.
So when I first ended my career, I wrote strongly articles denouncing Christian nationalism and articles, looking at the planks of our state GOP platform and the
Hmm.
harm they were causing and are still causing. Um, but yeah, I do have a goal of writing a memoir. It's kind of one of those projects on the back shelf with more
Yeah.
immediate financial concerns pressing. But definitely, I think we all have spiritual journeys and have a spark of the divine within us, and we access it in different ways and at different points in our lives. And we call it by different names. We may not
Hmm.
even think of it as divine necessarily, just inner wisdom or whatever. Um, but yeah, when I think that has been the biggest change in my life is coming to trust that inner wisdom and to um, focus on experiencing God directly, primarily in nature. Like you mentioned earlier, the awe and the wonder
Hmm.
and just the beauty. Um, and also, I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. So Bruce Springsteen concerts are very much a spiritual experience for me.
Totally.
They always have been. Um, so yeah, there are many ways and many places that I think we encounter the divine by whatever name we call it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I lived in Texas recently for a few years, and experienced or know a bit about what you're speaking, and I'm glad you're using your voice there to bring up these issues. And um, yeah, so to ask me a question, I guess.
So where do
How
you
would I
live
get?
now?
So I live in Boulder, Colorado now. So I moved back. So I've been in Boulder for 13 years, like, minus a couple in Austin. And I moved down there for a relationship that didn't work out, but I had a nice time in Austin, but it was time to come back home, and so I'm here in Boulder now. So
And tell me about the shift in your life from what you've shared on your Substack page. It sounds like you were raised with a more rigid religious
yeah,
doctrine kind of upbringing. When did that shift in your own mind, and what led to that change?
yeah. Interestingly, or I was raised in an Episcopal family, so it had a certain liberal. I mean, my family was very conservative, but religiously, Episcopalians are a little bit more liberal. But my family was sort of disintegrating in my teen years, and I found comfort in an evangelical community, a Bible study group that was connected to kind of this youth camp, and then I went very deep and very seriously into it as a teenager, and got really into fire and brimstone radio at the time, and so I really it's something it fed something in me that was maybe positive. There were some good influences in that community, in the among the young people there, but there were also it had a rigidness that fed something in me that was not healthy for me. And anyway, I let go of that, and as I went off to college, and became a journalist, and after college, and embraced kind of atheism, or at least severe agnosticism, and journalism and just the facts. And I became this travel writer, but eventually my life fell apart, and it had many causes. I was at the time taking 23 pills a day of psychiatric medications, 13 different medications, and for a misdiagnosis. But when I look back, it was really a spiritual issue. I had no connection to any kind of spiritual life and in myself either. And after the suicide of a friend, I did some serious soul searching, and I actually, I booked a trip to. I saw this little small article about the Jesus Trail in the Galilee region of Israel, and I hadn't written a story in a long time, and I wrote my editor at the New York Times and said I wanted to go hike this trail and write about it. And 24 hours later, I was walking the Jesus Trail from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee. And after that was over, then I ended up um, staying on it. Did a 10-week pilgrimage around Israel and Palestine, the West Bank, trying to kind of understand my connection with Jesus. And long story short, it was in the end, a misguided attempt to connect with my own heart through physical means. But when I got back, I realized I wasn't a Christian, but I was now a spiritual person, and that led me into some Eastern traditions, and to yoga, not just the physical yoga, but the philosophy and spirituality behind it, and ultimately to bhakti yoga, which kind of Christianity really is a form of bhakti yoga. It's sort of the devotion and worship, and so long story short, it was a long, slow evolution, but I began to realize that I really needed that I was a deep spiritual being and that I had rejected that, and I needed to find a way back. You know, and I think a big part of my quest, I kept seeking certainty, though. That was sort of my Achilles heel. And the more I sought certainty, the sort of the more frustrated I became. And why can't I be this? Why can't I be that? And finally, I started writing about it on Substack, and it was the writing process that really started to figure out what I really, really landed. And a couple of key voices out there, teachers that kind of I found podcasts of, and even met a few in person. One of them was the singer Krishna Das, who also has a podcast where he does teaching, and I actually have spent a little time with him. Other people like oh, I'm spacing on her name. Her last name is Bondi, but I came across her work where she talks about prayer and talked about how many of us are wounded spiritually from our youth, and have this punishing God. And listening to her talk about the imperfection and praying from an imperfect place, and connecting with the divine, and even as you're reading a book, or driving to work or whatever, and thinking of it in a much less lofty way than, not that, not in that I'm going to reach out to the divine. It's more like, hey, I'm here. Are you there? And that helped. And some other teachers who really talked about kind of honoring kind of the felt presence, the moment, and what you feel. And I realized that I feel connected a lot more than I thought I did, or maybe it's just developing more in me. But that's kind of a little bit of a map of the journey. And the more I noticed that I'm connected to the divine through this moment, through how I'm feeling in my body, the more in nature, for example, the more I realize I'm kind of already there, and there's this deep longing in many of us, I think. And I'm going on for a while here, but there's a poem by Rumi called Love Dogs, and it's one of my favorite poems. And the gist of it is that there's this man praying to Allah, and this guy walks up to him, this cynic does, and says, "Why are you praying? It's uh, you never get an answer, do you?" And the guy says, Maybe I don't get an answer. I don't know." And uh, the poem progresses, but he ends up going off into a dream, and he's ends up getting this message that, that dog you hear whining, calling out for its master, that longing, that cry out, is the return answer. And so the longing we feel as spiritual beings is normal, and it's good, and it is God asking us, or the divine, or the infinite, however you think about it, responding. That's it. The presence is right here, right now. So, like, and it's imperfect. I mean, I lose it all the time. I have days, I'm filled with doubt, but I also learned that doubt is part of the journey. So
Yeah, there's an interesting quote, and I wish I knew who to credit for it. Maybe I'll try to look it up later, but it's that the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty.
yeah, wow,
And I think there's so much truth to that. And also, as someone who, has a graduate degree, and in order to be a pastor in my denomination, the ELCA Lutheran Church, you have to do a 4-year master's program. and you get what's ironically called a Master of Divinity degree, which I find ridiculous. Obviously, no human can master the divine, right?
Right.
But so we, of course, study the Bible in great detail, and the New Testament in the original Greek in which it was written, and all of these things, and have these discussions. But there's a saying that seminary is where you go to have your answers questioned. And again, so much truth to that. The more I think we study any sacred text, the more we notice the nuances, and the more we
Yeah.
learn about the culture out of which that particular book of the Bible was written, or the presumed authors of it, and what was going on in their community at the time that they were trying to address.
Hmm.
Um, it's very fascinating to me, and also I know from my own experience, I can read a particular Bible verse and interpret it one way at one point in my life, and it can have this particular meaning, and then 10 years later I happen to read it again, and it says something totally different to me.
Yeah.
um and I think that's true of any book, and that any book can be sacred, and like we said, any experience, any moment can be sacred. The kind of the false dualism of the
Yeah.
either or, it's either material or holy, sacred, secular. All those dichotomies are so destructive, particularly the body shaming, and the idea that our flesh is evil and opposed to the spirit. And
Yeah.
so part of my journey has been just kind of that reintegration, and seeing my body as a holy temple, as well as the other experiences and people all around me, and that sense that the divine both lives in me and everyone else, and connects all of us, and not just humans but all of creation. And so if we can sense that and return to that,
Yeah.
then how does that change how we live?
Yeah. I've always admired people that are on a specific path, and I have nothing. Do not feel superior to them. Don't feel. I admire their devotion and ability to stay in that, and I just also know that for whatever reason, that's just not. I'm always, I mean, probably part of my complex trauma, whatever. But I can feel like an outsider. I don't really feel like I belong in certain groups, but one of my favorite books, and it's Siddhartha, and it's a really cool book. It gets criticized by spiritual people for being very kind of Western and individualistic, and it gets uh you know so it kind of has a little bit of a vibe about it. But there's a scene at the end of the first part of it where um, Siddhartha, who's been wandering around India for years, trying on all these different paths and these different yogic techniques to try to find enlightenment, and he encounters the Buddha himself in a grove, and he spends some time with him. And Siddhartha's traveling with his friend Govind, and Govind has decided that after all this searching that the Buddha is the answer. Um, and so he decides to stay, and Siddhartha decides he can't stay, and he has this encounter with the Buddha where he walks up to this is the Buddha, this is the awakened one, and he says, you've come up with the most perfect system I've ever encountered, and I can't, you've done it, you know, kind of. It's amazing what you've done. You've created this perfect system, and I cannot stay because it is not my path. And he turns around and walks away from the Buddha, and it almost brings tears to my eyes every time I hear that story or listen or tell that story, because that's it for so many of us who can see the beauty of these various paths, and also know that for us anyway, when you hold into something, any system is gonna eventually falls apart in your hands if you squeeze it tight enough, or the sand eventually comes through your fingers. And so Siddhartha goes in search of himself and the world and his higher self, and through a lot of other experiences, and that just has always resonated with me. So it's just symbolic of the path I've been on.
Yeah, and similar for me, it kind of ties back to that whole certainty thing,
Mm,
that for me, it's like the story of the blind men and the elephant, where each one is touching a different part of the elephant, and they're describing it, and they're contradicting each other and saying, no, no, the elephant is like this, the part that they're touching,
Hmm.
and the reality, of course, is that the elephant is all of those things, and that's how I think of the divine too. That it's impossible for any one religion or individual to fully have it all figured out about the
Right,
divine, because if we could, then it wouldn't be divine. It wouldn't be a higher power, right? We would be that power.
right.
Um, and I just think it's so important to honor that. And like you said, that for some people who still need that certainty, or who find that certainty comforting and it's meaningful to them, that's great. I'm not here to tell them
Yeah,
they're wrong, but at the same time, I am here to challenge the certainties that this person or this group of people is unacceptable to God, is unlovable, is
yeah.
sinful, is bad. Um, my everything that I um, have both sensed and read in the Bible and been taught and fully believe is that God created all of us in the image of God, or whatever name
Hmm.
you choose for God, and that we are all equally beloved members of the family, and so to exclude anyone is to exclude a piece of God. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't remember who said this or wrote this, but that the evil actually, if you'll kind of use that word, so often hides in the good. It's the
yes,
it's the it's the belief that one is so good, where I'm good and righteous and you're not, and that's exactly where the evil resides. Is the things you're talking about, where the hate emerges. So yeah,
yeah, and any group of humans can start out as a wonderfully supportive community,
yeah,
and then become an us versus them, insider versus outsider thing. Whether the most extreme examples being cults and gangs, but in so many other ways too. We it's so easy, especially now, because of the lack of kind of central community gathering spaces. And I remember when I was young, there were just like the three major networks, and like every
hmm,
American watched, take your pick, 60 Minutes or NBC Nightly News, or the Super Bowl. Even there were
yeah,
these shared, and so we may not have agreed about the solutions to problems, but we at least started with the same set of facts.
yeah,
And like, this is what is the question is, A, is it a problem? B, if it is, how do we address it? Versus not even agreeing on whether something is real or true or
yeah,
not,
yeah,
factual information. And also, we were kind of by necessity, whether it was in public school or in any other community conversation, um, to interact with people who were different from us, had very
yeah,
different life experiences. Um, and now it's just very easy to stay in our silos and only have conversations with people that we already know agree with us,
yeah,
and to see anyone who doesn't as bad or threatening in some way. Um, and there are cases where that's true, where there is documented harm has been done, and one is right to be afraid of certain individuals based on their own past experience, or based on their ethnic group, their sexual
hmm,
orientation, whatever. But at the same time, it's so easy to, for me, and to return hate with hate, and to demonize the people who are demonizing the marginalized groups, right?
right, right.
And
I think there's also something though that I've been noticing and trying to look at in my own self about, and yes, I have no tolerance for hate and the mixture of hate and religion. But I also know that those of us who are more free thinkers can sometimes pathologize people of faith, and
yes,
that's something, that I think we have to watch out for, because, yeah, there's a way that we are creating part of this problem by the way we, you know, by the way agnostics and atheists can pathologize people of faith, even, and so yeah, it's a tricky topic to get into in these times, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And basically any time an individual or group feels threatened, we automatically get into that fight or flight response where our ability for rational thought is overwritten by the
Yeah,
survival instinct. And
right.
so we do respond uh, defensively, or we go on the attack, and we aren't capable of that level of understanding and of rational thought that is necessary to address the
Yeah.
divisions, to heal the wounds.
Yes, absolutely. Um, anyway, it's all of this is, kind of circling back to the individual journey. I think it is hard today to find community around this kind of place, which is part of why, I've not to move into self promotion, but I teach this class called Writing the Soul, and it's just turned out to be this amazing group of people where we come and I give a prompt we meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's they're people who are spiritually inclined but really not on a particular path, and I give them a prompt that has some spiritual basis, but it's also a writing prompt for self discovery through journaling, and then they write for 20-25 minutes, then we come back and share what we've written, and I think we need more community like that, and it's hard to find for those of us who are kind of both doubters and spiritually inclined. And so I don't know if you
Yes.
found that to be true, but
I have very much found that to be true, and like you, I have decided, to create that kind of safe, inclusive community that I both need and believe the world desperately needs more of. Um, and so I had one. Well, first I taught a 6 week spiritual support group,
mm,
and we had an atheist, a pagan, a witch, several of us who were former or kind of sort of current Christians, but not in for the whole everything. And so one week we talked about our spiritual experiences. One week we talked about spiritual places for us. One week we talked about spiritual role models for us.
hmm
Um, and it was just so powerful and incredible. And at the end of the 6 weeks, two things happened. One is the members said, "Look, can we pay you to keep meeting? Because we haven't even told our families and friends some of the stuff we've shared in this group. We need
hmm
this space." And the other thing is that we all discovered that no matter how diverse our spiritual beliefs were, or our past experiences or religious upbringing or lack of it, underneath it were the same core fears of not being enough, and desire to be good people, and guilt or shame about something that we had done in the past, or some aspect of who we are. Um, and it was just so powerful. And now that's the same reason I got into coaching, was because,
hmm
especially spiritual coaching, there are too many dangerous gurus out there, whether they're actual religious leaders of a congregation, or they're, you know, whatever you want to call them, coaches, spiritual gurus that people seek
yeah,
out, um, that manipulate people, and that even if they start out with good intentions, they encourage this dependence and this idea that, I have the answers that you seek. You can't trust your
right,
own answers.
yeah,
And I think that's so unhealthy. And it's equally unhealthy for the person who thinks they have all the answers, right? Or who claims to, because we all can learn from each other, and we need to.
yeah,
Um, and so I'm now, transitioning into this new ongoing community that I'm creating on both Substack and Zoom, that is going to have live conversations as a group twice a month on Zoom. And then I will send out weekly journal prompts, and
nice,
twice a month, more longer, more reflective, deeper essays. And we will, in the comments section, which will be paywalled for members only, we'll just have an ongoing conversation about these deeper issues, because,
hmm
as you said, for so many of us, there is no other place to do that. And
yeah,
even if we do have a place, it's a place of only people who think like we do. So
right,
we're still limited. And so, yeah, I have learned so much from my atheist friend, from my friend who's totally into astrology, from all these other systems, and it has enriched my life greatly in my own spirituality, and it's just helped open my mind to the reality that, yeah, I had this one piece of the elephant that I for a while thought was the whole elephant, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. I get an email or from either a reader or a family member or a friend every week, saying, why don't you just choose something? I was a seeker too, and then until I finally chose X, and now I'm happy, and I'm just like I always write. I'm so happy for you, and that's not necessary for everybody to land in that place, and it's just funny how people want to impose their what
Yes.
they've found on others. So yeah,
And as we said before, it's not just the um, religious people who want to impose their brand of religion on us. It can equally be, someone who's an atheist who is absolutely convinced there is nothing divine, and I'm going to prove that to you, right? Or you
yeah,
need to accept that truth, or and take your pick of any other ideology or kind of therapy or whatever it might be. It's so easy for us to want to be right, and that means
yeah.
someone else has to be wrong.
Yeah, it reminds me. I attended a workshop with Michael Mead in this spring, and I think Carl Jung might have originated the idea, but it gets quoted by other people too. But that you're on the right path when the path disappears, and I've always loved that. That every path eventually, no matter which one you choose, will stop working in a way, and you find yourself in the woods, and the work is to find your footing in the woods and be able to find comfort that this tree knows where it is and this bird knows where it is, and you as human being can know where you are in this place of uncertainty. And that's a meaningful quote that I try to remember. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I would add to that um, for me, there have been guides that human guides that have helped me find my way out of that wilderness,
Yes,
and I
yes.
see as messengers from or agents of the divine, right? Who came into my life at the right time.
Yeah.
And some of them we may no longer be in touch. I needed them at that time for that role, and others are lifelong friends or my spouse in one case.
Right.
Same thing.
Ideally, they lead you back into the woods though, because if you're totally on their path, then you become a devotee of them, and the
Exactly. That's
dependency
when we get
starts. So
right
yeah,
back where we started, right? We just have a different leader
yeah,
that we once followed, right?
yeah.
Uh,
The good teachers really try to empower you. I think is what it comes down to be you know to be on your journey. So
yeah, there are two messages that I always emphasize strongly with anyone who's considering working with me as their coach or joining one of my groups. And one is that I'm not this fully enlightened guru who has all the answers and now has a perfect life. And uh, even if the answers that I do have are not necessarily the right answers for you. So my
right.
focus is, one, help you find and trust your own answers, and two, help you learn to rely on your own inner compass instead of
Hmm.
maps or directions from anyone else, including me.
Yeah. There's another story I like to tell that there there's a tradition in Polynesia of open ocean canoeing, and it goes back hundreds and thousands of years. And there was a guy that learned from that tradition who was living in Hawaii. He was sort of the modern day embodier of that whole tradition, and he knew how he could set his canoe off with the ocean and find Easter Island, for example, from Hawaii. And you know he uh, he understood, basically that the wind, the stars, the waves, all these different factors. He is what he paid attention to, but mostly his inner compass. And he even, I think he, tied his testicles to the bottom of the boat. But um, so but he one time he was headed to Easter Island, and he fell asleep, and he snapped awake and knew he thought he was lost, and he just went inward, and he engaged with the stars and the waves, but he mostly engaged with his own heart, and began to try to pull these islands out of the ocean, and in his heart and mind, and he eventually pointed the canoe in the right direction, and found his way there. And that's it sounds like a superpower almost. It sounds almost incredible, but that kind of inner guidance is possible with us, I believe. Maybe not, not to find Easter Island from Hawaii, but to find our own path in life is finding that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that you mentioned that because my husband and I lived in Hawaii. We lived on Maui for 10 years and then Oahu for 5. So, and a big draw for us was just the spiritual vibe. There's no other way to
Hmm.
describe it. Um, and we literally, we were pastors in Pennsylvania at the time. We had just graduated from seminary and each were serving different churches in Pennsylvania. And so it was like 5 years into our the churches that we served. And we took a vacation to Hawaii for our 10-year anniversary. And the pull was so strong and we were so in love with it, that we went back to Pennsylvania. We put our house on the market and within a year had sold our house, resigned from our calls as pastors, gotten rid of most of our belongings, driven cross
Hmm.
country, took a one-way flight to Maui, arrived with no jobs, no place to live, knowing that the careers we had just started were not going to be possible because there was only one church of our denomination on Maui. And yeah, that, it was that inner knowing that this is where we're supposed to be. It doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. We're still paying off the student loans. We're supposedly
Yeah.
starting these careers, right? But no regrets at all. And we were there for 10 years on Maui and then on Oahu before financial realities and other career needs brought us back to the mainland U.S. But I will never regret making that choice. It was fantastic,
Yeah.
and I consider sea turtles my spiritual spirit animals. I got a tattoo in my 40s for the first time. My one and only tattoo is a Hawaiian petroglyph of a sea turtle.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
and I have sea turtles everywhere around my house. And so, yeah, it's just being that openness again to that inner knowing, and whether we
Yeah.
consider it just our own intuition or we believe that intuition is the voice of the divine speaking in us.
Right.
Either way, yeah, being able to be quiet long enough to hear it and to be willing to trust it is a lifelong journey for me, at least.
Yeah, I was had a conversation this morning with a memoir coaching client of mine, and we are talking about sort of the end of his book, and he's also a member of my Writing the Soul group, and we're talking about the various people in my group, but we all have been on these journeys. Some of us are children of alcoholics. Many of us seem to have complex trauma and that sort of thing. And but what I'm sort of getting tired in my own mind, even though I've been through my own journey with diagnoses of these kind of cerebral ways of understanding that. And what I realized in speaking with him is that all of these people in this group are essentially shaman. And I use that word with respect, but what I mean by that is, in ancient cultures, the shaman were the sort of the wounded healers and these people outside of culture that could see through things. And there was so much wisdom in the people in this group and in this particular client, but there needs to be a flipping from being seen as something where something's wrong with you to seeing that there's the gift in that. And I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of passionate about in my coaching with clients and also in this group is helping people to see that this wound is where the light comes in, and it is their superpower once you sort of transmute it and see that you are the wounded healer. So yeah.
Absolutely. There's actually a book by Henry Nouwen called The Wounded Healer
Mm,
that was powerful for me. And I shared a quote from it on notes quite a while back. And I also wrote an article from my own experience about mental breakdowns being a step on the way to breakthroughs, and
mm,
how I never would be where I am now if I hadn't been so severely depressed that I seriously considered suicide for almost a year and just got
yeah.
no relief. And that I needed that utter just loss of identity, loss of my former career, feeling utterly adrift lost in the wilderness, in order to be willing to take the risk and to kind of get to know myself again, and who am I really, and how do I want to live, and um, all of those things. I would not have risked them had I not been in a situation where I was like, I have nothing left
Yeah.
to lose, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it was Jung who said something like, if your life doesn't fall apart, you're screwed. I mean, you're in midlife, it
Yeah,
needs
you
to
just
fall
stay on
apart.
autopilot, right?
Yeah. You've got to then reorder your life, and hopefully, for men, instead of buying the red convertible and getting the young girlfriend, you actually apply yourself in some way that's going to sustain you and help you rebuild your life and give back to others in the second half of your life. That's the opportunity that's there, and the temptation is just to use it as a midlife crisis and spin out further. So there's kind of a real moment of reckoning there when we need our lives to fall apart so we can reorder them. So
We do, yeah, and for some of us, they fall apart more dramatically than others,
yeah.
and I think that's another danger with some in the coaching industry, or therapy, or whatever it might be, is that or even just anyone who's very successful and sells courses on how to be as successful as they are. There's often that tendency to deny or minimize what they went through to get to the point they are now, and the
Hmm.
time it took, and the
Yeah.
just the inner healing work. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's deeply painful to start feeling all those emotions that we kept buried deeply, and to just totally reassess your life and your beliefs, and think former certainties that you either reject entirely, or come to well, yeah, that could be true, but or that's part of the truth maybe for me, but there's also this, and
Mhm.
be okay with the paradoxes and the evolving beliefs versus this is what I believe, that's all there is to it, it's never going to change.
Yeah. You know, I think there's also this need to recognize just how kind of messed up and toxic our culture is. Particularly it is right now, obviously, but even when it's functioning, it asks us to go to work for 40 hours a week and then be able to show up for our children and our partners, and there's just a way that we've structured society that's very hard to stay connected to oneself and to what you value, and so it is work, and it is these some of these gurus might say that all you need to do is have this realization and that fixes things, but it's a journey, and it's a meaningful and even a fun one. Gosh, my healing journey, having been a traveler, has taken me all over the world I've been privileged to do that, but it's sort of I found myself going down so many different ways in finding healing, and whether it's the love of a dog or a particular community of yoga friends or therapy or travel. Like I said, it's just we can find nourishment in so many different places, and we need to. There's no one fix, one stop shop for this kind of journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it part of the healing is becoming willing to share our experience. And for me, when I first started my Changing Life Substack in 2022, I was writing personal essays, being completely vulnerable about my mental health struggles, and my depression
Yeah.
experience, and the end of my career as a pastor, and all the things. And before I first started publishing, I had to take a moment and say, do I really want to put this out there for the whole world to see? Because, what if I need to be employed, or a client sees it and they're like, ah, she's really messed up, or look at her history. I don't want anything to do with her, she's going to fall apart or whatever.
Yeah.
But then that was quickly followed by, well, if someone would react that way on hearing my story, that's not someone I would want to work with anyway,
Right.
and they're not, going to be the people that I want to spend a lot of time with. And so it's okay if they find it offensive. And also, it was incredibly healing for me, for the shame. I had so much shame.
Oh,
And once
completely.
I
Yeah.
let the whole world know everything kind of preemptively, where I don't have to worry about anyone else spilling my secrets because I already have,
Yeah.
it was so liberating.
I
And
agree. Yeah.
yeah, again, then that leads to, okay, I want to help other people who are currently still feeling lost and worthless and hopeless
Yeah.
um, get to this place, not by doing exactly what I did or believing what I've come to believe, but by taking the journey and being embracing the uncertainty and sitting
Yeah.
with the questions and finding their own answers.
No, finally talking about and writing about, our journey and our shame is it's just sort of like finally taking off a backpack full of rocks. It really
Yes.
has that feeling. And I have students a couple who've written beautiful memoirs but now are stuck, afraid to share them, afraid to put them into the world, and I have so much kind of compassion for them because I just wish they knew how freeing it would be, even if they, serialized it or put it up on Substack or started podcasting about it, even if they ended up not wanting to put it out as a book, but it's sort of like they did that work and bared their soul in their book and yet they're not taking that next step. And there's so much, not being witnessed by others is so healing and also just like we said, unburdening and seeing that there's really nothing, that shame is the sense of, the difference between guilt and shame, I think is a good
Yes.
distinction to make, that we feel guilty when we've done something wrong, appropriately so, but shame is this toxic shame anyways, this feeling that we're just bad, and that's
Yes.
we can emerge from childhood with this feeling that we're just bad, and speaking about these things and writing about it is such a path towards unburdening ourselves of that shame and being
Yeah.
witnessed too. Yeah.
And again, it's not just about self liberation. For me, it's been so gratifying, like as I've continued to write and now to do these live conversations, to meet so many other people who say me too, and thank you so
Yeah.
much for being willing to share this because it helped me um, share my story, or it helped me look at my story
Yeah.
in a new light and not have so much shame to hear that, here you are, and you also seriously considered suicide, or you also, lost your job and ultimately your career and didn't know what to do, and whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's funny, I'm now so used to being in groups and among people where when we ask how are you, we genuinely want to know and we care and we aren't afraid to bare our souls. That when I'm not in those settings and someone says how are you, and I start to tell them, and they get this like shocked back away, like, oh no, deer in the headlights. Look, I have to remember, oh yeah, right, for a lot of people, they don't talk about how they really are. They smile and say I'm fine, how are you? And hopefully, Brad will be able to rejoin us soon. His internet was unstable and apparently just dropped entirely. But I want to acknowledge all the great comments in the chat. I can't do two things at once with my brain. I would lose the conversation if I read and commented on all the chats. I can't even always read them because the way Substack works, they just scroll up and disappear relatively quickly. But that there have been some great comments in the chat, and it's wonderful that all of you are also saying yes. We're not alone in our struggles, and even at our lowest point, we are still loved, and there are still people who um, appreciate us and can benefit from hearing us share honestly about those low points as well as the good points of our life now. Um, and Brad and I had started to talk about how our society is so toxic. And yes, we have made a god out of productivity. And it's not even just working 40 hours a week now. It's, be available 24/7 on call via email or phone call or text. And it is hard. And I know several people who have moved to other countries after visiting them and realizing, hey, we don't have to live this way. This is so unhealthy. Um, and it is. There's a wonderful book by Dr. Gabor Mate. Actually, all of his books are wonderful, but in particular, The Myth of Normal, really talks about all of the ways that our culture um, makes us sick, essentially, and then wants to sell us the cure, or at least the escape, or the, numb yourself so you don't have to feel how miserable you really are, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, it's wonderful that Substack exists and that so many of us are writing about our journeys and the full truth of our journeys, the messy parts of our journeys, not just the highlight reel that, is so prevalent on social media and in society, that, all the commercials with the shiny, happy people, as one documentary that exposed the truth behind that was titled. Um, that yeah, we all have issues, and even if we had, the most wonderful loving parents, they were still human beings dealing with their own issues, stresses in their life, and the whole ancestral lineage trauma, whatever it might be. It's impossible to get through life and not have scars, essentially, and not have wounds that we either heal or we act out of our woundedness and hurt other people. um, and yeah, it's just so important to acknowledge that and to release the shame by realizing that, what, everyone has issues, and no one ever reaches this point of complete enlightenment, perfect healing, always responds appropriately in every situation, never loses their cool. Um, so yeah, I mean, what more can we say than that? Um, And so the Zoom group I mentioned earlier is basically a place to do that. We'll have twice monthly live conversations and ongoing private conversations, in paywalled post. And if you want to take part in the kind of preview gathering and the conversation, it is on Sunday, September 21st from 11 a.m. to noon Central. And you can register for it at easiest link to remember is bit.ly/CL Zoom 2, the number 2. So CL for changing lives, Zoom, and the number 2, CL Zoom 2, bit.ly dash or slash CL Zoom 2. And we actually had one conversation already on September 7th, but not that many people could make it. And so we agreed, yeah, we're going to do this again in 2 weeks. And then probably starting in October will be the paywalled community, so we can feel safe to really go deeper and build ongoing relationships with each other. And I'll send out the weekly journal prompts and twice monthly longer essays to just spark journal reflections and reflections that we share in the comments. So if that sounds good to you, I hope you'll come to the free gathering and see if it um, seems like something you'd want. I also have a tab on my Substack page with information about my private coaching. And like I shared earlier, I'm a former pastor. So especially for people who are wrestling with what they believe spiritually or what they were raised to believe that they just can't go along with anymore. And they're dealing with a lot of estranged relationships or totally cut off relationships with family and friends because they rejected the beliefs that their family members and friends still strongly believe, or they came out as LGBTQ and were rejected for that reason, or whatever it may be. And also people who are just in a time of transition, maybe an unexpected job loss, or they want to get out of their current career, but, feel obligated to stay basically, or trapped for financial reasons. Same thing with relationships. I shared in a previous live that my parents finally divorced after I had left the home, but I don't have any memories of them being happy together and modeling healthy communication and showing affection. And so the idea that, parents should stay together for the sake of the kids, and then, if they split up later, that's fine. That's not necessarily always in kids' best interest. But again, every person's experience is different. I'm not here to be, an evangelist for people who are unhappily married getting divorced, because some people are able to go through counseling and really work on the relationship and end up, very happy and as in love as they were when they first got together. There's no right or wrong answer for every situation. Um, uh, since Brad apparently his internet is not going to let us let him rejoin us, I'll wrap up soon. But if anybody wants to ask a question or in the chat, you're welcome to. And I just want to thank all of you for showing up. And, as I said, I couldn't respond to all the comments, but I did see them scroll by and appreciate them and appreciate the heart reactions and just knowing that you all are here and um, care enough to listen to what I have to say. Last week, I actually did an entire live by myself for the first time, and it was very intimidating. I was very anxious before I did it. And yet there were people willing to listen to me talk and write supportive comments in the chat. So I very much appreciate that. And I appreciate, all of the subscribers to my Substack, most of whom are free. But again, they cared enough about what I have to say and about my life to want to know more and leave supportive comments and become subscribers. And I'm grateful for all of that. And I would just encourage anyone who's just getting started now with their Substack and feels like they're writing into the void or speaking into the void. I started with 0 subscribers. I never had a social media following. I'm not even on most social media. Um, and yet I started in 2022 and notes did not exist yet on the Substack. Certainly the ability to do lives was not an option. It was only written post. And I still managed to get up to the 700 plus subscribers I have now. And I never had a lead magnet, all of the marketing tips you're supposed to follow. I just showed up as my authentic self, and people who resonated with that found me and continue to find me. So I just want to encourage anyone who feels like, this is a waste of my time. No, why would anyone care what I have to say about my life if they don't know me? To just keep writing, and also to remember that, you're helping yourself by writing and putting it out there, even if you don't get the response from others that you had hoped for. That's been a key learning for me, that I'm writing for myself as much as for other people. And that, as I said earlier, it heals my shame just to put it out there for whoever may happen to find it. And if even one person finds it who really needed to feel like they weren't alone and that someone understood them, then it was worth writing. Um, so that's my 2 cents worth for today. And it's been almost an hour now, and it looks like Brad's not going to be able to make it back, but I'm grateful for the time he was here and the wisdom that he shared, and for all of you who are tuning in. And I very much hope some of you will also be able to participate in the conversation on Zoom. And again, that it's bit.ly/CLZoom2, the number. Or just reach out to me via DM on Substack, and check out my coaching page on Substack if that interests you. Also, if you would like to do a Substack live with me, DM me as well. As you saw, we talk generally about the ways our beliefs and our lives have changed. I have a different guest each week. And at first, I limited it to guests over 50 because I think it's important to lift up the older writers on Substack, especially. And in our culture, we tend to dismiss older people and we become invisible, and people it's not like other cultures where the wisdom of the elders is respected and elders are, looked to as wise teachers. We kind of assume, oh, as you get older, your mind goes, your hearing goes, your vision goes, you're just, end up in a nursing home. And of course, some people do, but many of us, and people older than me, I've had 2 women in their 80s as guests, others in their late 60s, early 70s. And I just read an article CNN about a 102-year-old man who climbed the Mount Fuji, the tallest mountain in Japan, over 13,000 feet, and broke his own Guinness World Record by doing that. Um, so that's also my encouragement. If you're older and you think, well, it's too late for me to do whatever it is you've always wanted to do, whether it's a one-time thing like skydiving or climbing a mountain, or a project, a passion project of writing a book, or teaching a class, doing a craft, whatever. We can all change our lives at any point. And if you want help changing yours, reach out to me. And again, thanks so much to everyone who tuned in live or who may see this later. I keep these to an hour, so I'm going to sign off now. But you're welcome to DM me if you have questions or comments, or you'd like to find out more about being a guest, doing a Substack Live with me. And thank you all again for being here, and hope to see some of you. I do these lives every Friday starting at either 1 p.m. or more often 2 p.m. now, because I have another support group that I lead that ends at 12:30. So hope to see you next week. It will be at 2 p.m. Central, and my guest will be Robin Motzer, talking about their work related to conservation and restoring the earth, and how we can all be part of that healing. And I see posts in the chat there about that. So yes, that will be next Friday at 2 p.m. And so hope to see some of you there. And again, thanks for tuning in today. Hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Bye.